This is Transforming Leaders Monthly, and this month, we're going to talk about crisis leadership and teams. And it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and former student, which I won't spare his blushes, Gerold Knight, who's Group Chief Risk Officer at Coca Hellenic. I'll get Gerald to introduce himself in just a moment or two before we go any further. And Gerald's got a whole heap of things to share with you, some of which we've learned together over the last, how long have we known each other, Gerald?
7 years.
7 years. So over the last 7 years, we've explored a fair few interesting things around the subjects of crisis, leadership and teams. Just before we move on to James, just a little word about where Transforming Leaders comes from and what the idea is. Transforming Leaders is the creation of the middle of the three James Kirk brides you can see at the top. I think we've had some technical issues. Lester, just raise your hand for a moment so people can see who you are, please. Transforming Leaders, to an extent, is the creation of Dr. Lester Massingham, who's been a trainer for a very long time and academic as well, of course. And Lester put together a lovely piece of strategic management development for transformational leadership development, really, which pulls together some of his ideas working with the Chartered Management Institute and some of the other ideas which come from York St John University's MBA in transformational leadership strategy. So this is the idea of what Transforming Leaders is about, and this monthly workshop will deal with different aspects of this model, either analysing your business, analysing your market, looking at constraints and opportunities, planning for change, creating stakeholder value, or leading change. And I'd go as far as to say that this afternoon's topic very definitely covers most of those areas, I think it's fair to say, given what Gerald has been through. So I thought what we do, rather than go into a conventional presentation, although Gerald I might draw something on screen occasionally, I thought that Gerald and I and the others could have a bit of a conversation about what Gerald has been up to and really what's been happening in Coca-Cola Hellenic, which is I'll let Gerald explain what that is in a moment or two, over the past period. So Gerald, please introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself. Is a good place to start, I think.
Thanks, Clive, and good evening to everyone. It's good morning from me. I'm coming to you from Amsterdam. We've just come in a major storm, so we've had massive heat waves here, and which is unusual for the Netherlands, and now the storms from the UK hit us yesterday. But I'm based in Amsterdam. I'm the Chief Risk Officer for Coca-Cola HBC, as Clive said. We are one of the largest franchise bottling partners of the Coca-Cola system, and our territories cover a big chunk of the former Eastern Europe, including Russia. We also have Nigeria, and we have Ireland. In total, 28 countries that we cover. A very diverse operational spread, as you would imagine, with countries including Italy in the mix as well. And in Hellenic, I lead what we call the business resilience function. The team has taken on the new paradigm of business resilience, where you need to do a lot of things up front as well, proactively, rather than the old model of just having crisis management and business continuity. So we embrace the enterprise risk management function, so ensuring risk management contributes to the growth of the business and its continuity, and the protection of the assets. So two elements coming into play: proactive work, reactive, and also in the middle I've got insurance as well, so the risk transference element falls into place there. As Clive said, I was a student of his for the past few years, graduated in December last year with my PhD, so thanks, Clive, for your guidance over the years. And my focus was on crisis management, and I'll touch a bit more on that as we go. In the Coke system, I've been with Hellenic for 7 years almost, and before that, I've actually been in the Coke system 21 years. And one thing about the Coke system is you can travel basically to many places, experience many different companies. And while we all sort of do the same thing, we do it in different ways with different organisational cultures. So Hellenic, we are a bit about us. As I said, we're one of the largest bottlers, but we're a Swiss domiciled, UK listed. But traditionally, we're a Greek company. And our first operation was in Nigeria as a franchise operation going back 50-odd years. So I've also worked with the Coca-Cola company based in Asia Pacific Group. And before that, I was the General Manager of Risk Services for Coca-Cola Amatil based in Sydney. So 21 years in the corporate world, and before that in government security roles and doing risk work as well. That's a bit about me, Clive.
So, I mean, we've all been, thank you for that. And well done on surviving being supervised by me, I might add. We've all seen a lot of different things over the last 6 months. Goodness knows we've seen more than I think many of us would want to ever see again. My mother referred to it as being worse than the Second World War, so that's saying something. But how do you prepare for something like this, or how do you actually set in motion sort of the crisis management function at CCH?
Dealing specifically with crisis, well, I'll actually just take a step back. When I spoke about the function, so the things that incorporate, and when I came on board, we were in silos. So crisis was sitting over in one area, ERM in another, security in a different space as well. So one of the first things we did was have a look at where are the elements that can contribute to the protection of the business and obviously the growth. So we looked at the separate streams and we brought them all together under the one function and under one leader. So that encapsulates the ERM program. So very much looking at not only the growth aspects, the opportunity for the business, and challenging the way that risk links into strategy, but then also having the protective elements there as well. So up front, having the right security in place for our people, the fraud control that any business needs. Having, as I said, in the middle, I call it our transference out to insurance, because everything else that we do flows into the way the market from an insurance perspective would see us. And they look at us too from the way we do crisis management and business continuity. So we saw those elements needing to come together and we drew them together. And I've got to say I've been extremely lucky here because there's been a very high level of support, particularly around the importance of crisis management. And Clive, and you and I spoke very early on when I was doing my studies that, the thing that we wanted to look at was why do teams deviate from process? So we have a very strong crisis management program here. In fact, our former CEO, unfortunately, he tragically passed away a couple of years ago. When I first started this focus on crisis response in 2014, and the company were already picking it back up again because in the Coke system we have a very robust process that is used by all bottlers and the Coca-Cola company. The process was being reinvigorated. We picked up on that. We were doing a set number of what we call simulations and validations. The simulation obviously being the process of running the test and the validation is the scoring. And I got asked, Gerald, why do we only do 8 a year? And my answer to Dimitri's was money. If you give me money and people, I can do anything. And the fact that he turned around and said, I want you to come up with a plan that will deliver 12 simulations a year, illustrated to me that there was a great focus and a great tone and a realisation by the leadership that this was an important element. So training was seen as the fundamental core of getting the crisis management right. The way we work as an organisation, though, from a response perspective, is we have a lot of business units. And as you would appreciate with the cultural nuances, the language issues, crisis response needs to be done locally. We can set the guidelines, we can set the standards and the strategy at a group level. And I actually lead the group crisis team. But the operational response needs to be localised because they understand their countries, they understand the dynamics around regulation. That I, sitting in Amsterdam, which actually isn't one of my territories, by the way, we just happen to have a finance office here, I don't understand. So we have business units supervised at the group level with a very strong training regime supporting that, and that's critical. If you don't invest and you don't get the right capabilities in your leadership or your team, and we were able to convince, well, I didn't have to do much convincing really, the leadership of the importance of the program and crisis response. Then the simulations became almost, everyone knew that they were coming. We changed the way we scored. We became very, in the old days when we first started, we had a pass and fail, and it was a very subjective scoring, evaluation, I should say. Then we went to a scoring mechanic. So we could actually deep dive into where we were seeing team strengths and their opportunities to develop. So that's sort of how we came about it in Hellenic. So localised response, group oversight, we drive the training and the awareness and the continued education. And we ensure in all times that whenever there is an activation of the team, that we run a lessons learned session. So what did the team learn about the way they responded? Not only in respect to the external response potentially, but as a team, how did their dynamics work? And I think that's a very important to then take into the learning circle.
Brilliant. So big investment in training. What's the sort of the approach you take with the training? What you do? I know that we've talked a little bit about this. You do a lot of simulations, a lot of dry run throughs with things. How does that work?
The main approach is simulation. So we go out, we have a training team that goes out into the field. So one of my managers is in charge of the development of the program. We're very lucky in that we've got a lot of support from the specialist areas within the business. So as a fast-moving consumer goods company producing Coke, which I'm drinking, or Coke Zero, we actually produce a lot of products. So we have potential quality issues, as any company that produces food can have. So we always have a quality member on the team. Corporate affairs, reputation of the business. I see reputation as a consequence, not a risk itself. Reputation is going to be impacted by something we've done. So it's going to be a consequence that we need to manage. So we have our PA and C people, public affairs communications, come on the training team as well. And we do this in conjunction with our partners in what we call our partner in growth, which is the Coke company. Don't want to get into it now. For those who don't know how the Coke system works, the Coke company produces the concentrate. Essentially, they do all the marketing. They're the brand owners. We make the stuff and we sell it. That's basically the differentiation. But they have a strong vested interest in the program because they're the brand owner. So we take the training team. As a team, we practice, and in the past we've been doing a day training beforehand. Refreshing teams on the concepts and the processes and the practices and the procedures. So essentially the offensive routines, if we go academically, and then day two, they get to perform and we get to watch them. We do a lot of social media now in there, so we use live social media every chance we can. So we'll be feeding in, and when I say live, it's a simulated environment, and we test how quickly the messaging from a social media perspective goes through. Is the traditional media or the external communication strategy linking to stakeholders back correctly being utilised in social media? And we also look at the dynamics in the team. But I specifically watch leadership, how strong a leader is. Do they have the right level of control? Do they have the right level of interaction? Because it's our view is everybody. You're not on a crisis team to be told what to do. You're there to give an opinion and to discuss through what is the issue that you're facing and the problem, understand it and come up with solutions. So everyone's there because they bring a specialised role. So we look at the interrelationships of the individuals on the team as well to see how they perform. And obviously, because we have two systems at play, do we act as one team? Which is critical when you've got a system such as ours. We've got to be one team. We've got to be unified in our response. So that's not how we approach it. So we spend 2 days in the field. We are looking, I can touch on later, some great new innovations in this space. And I think we're going to, that'll help us even take the program further in 2021 and beyond.
So I just want to mention to people, it's something I'll be changing for next month. when I book this, the technology I use to actually book this is Zoom Webinar. And what I didn't know, you learn something every day, is that Zoom Webinar doesn't allow pictures of attendees or doesn't allow video for attendees. Next month's will be run as a meeting, so attendees will be able to see pictures. It doesn't mean that you can't ask questions, and if you want to drop questions for Gerald into the chat, and I'll open up the microphones a little bit later on in another few moments, and allow a bit of Q&A for people if they'd like to join in. So any questions into the chat just at the moment. Apologies for the video. That will be fixed at the next meeting. That was something that I learned after about 20 people had booked to join us. So that was why. So you are fast-moving consumer goods. What is crucial in all of this, I mean, you've got a whole, I imagine you don't know what the secret ingredient is. No one knows what the secret ingredient is. Okay? But you've got a massive supply chain. How does that get affected when you get a situation like we're in at the moment? How have you actually managed that whole process of getting the goods into your various plants?
I think we've been quite fortunate in that we had very strong plans in place. If we go back, the other thing I forgot to mention that sits alongside crisis management is BCP, and that sits within my portfolio as well. And as I said earlier, by bringing the proactive elements of ERM, where you can identify potential exposures to the business, plus the opportunities, and then the reactive components together, creates a lot of synergies and a lot of visibility of where potential issues can emerge. So very early on, our crisis teams activated in all markets. And while I say in concept we work as local group, that was really enforced in this case. Because I remember on a number of occasions, leaders would ring me and say, what do you think we should do? Well, we would give some guidance, but it was about you need to interpret the local nuances of the response by your government in respect to COVID-19. And because we're seeing borders shut very quickly, we were seeing a disconnect in the way that, in my view, it was quite strange as an Australian sitting over here, on my concept of the EU and Schengen and how it all should work, was sort of a little bit shattered because I saw such an array of, well, shut the borders, open the borders, shut the borders. And a lot of our teams, we worked very hard early on in understanding the government regulations. So the local teams did a lot of work on understanding the implications of the decision that was made. We were looking the whole time at our supply chain and analysing the potential implications. I can say that because the plan's already in place, the teams were able to work out where the potential bottlenecks might be and respond accordingly. And we had, except for some minor issues at one or two plants in respect to COVID-19, one, we had very limited cases in the first couple of months, and we were able to maintain the supply chain because we had teams talking to one another locally. So if a country was bordering another, and I'll give an example, Italy to Austria, for example, if you needed product to go between the two, we needed to understand the way that both governments were interpreting what they were putting into place. One of the lucky things was also that we were deemed as an essential producer. Obviously, we produce waters, we produce juice, we produce other products. So from a supply point of view, our corporate affairs people had to do a lot of government relations to ensure that was in place, but that assisted as well. So from a supply chain point of view, it was understanding, pre-planning, and then as our crisis teams, I think the IMCR teams, as we call them, incident management crisis resolution teams, did a very effective job in interpreting and responding to the different elements of the government regulations that were being put in place. So pre-planning, again, is critically important, but it's also about understanding the supply chain and where the bottlenecks might be. And then if there are potential issues, and bearing in mind the supply chain for us, we were needing to bring material in to produce and then get it back into the trade in order for our customers to sell to the consumers. So, we had to understand all elements Italy's a great example because it went down to lockdown extremely early. Our plant was up and running the whole time, and we continued to supply our customers. Obviously, you need to respond accordingly because with HoReCa out of space, what do you need to put more into the what we call the modern channel or the supermarket trade? So a lot of diverse thinking had to go into the problem analysis, as we call it, by the crisis team, where we use a number of tools. We look at the problem, we try and look at market sensitivities and the impact. And I think the other thing too, from a supply chain point of view, who are the stakeholders? Do you know who your stakeholders are? And are you responding to their needs in respect to the activities that we decide are relevant to meet the challenges in front of us?
Fantastic. Got a great question from Elmarie Porthouse. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Two parts. Has the relationship between the boards and executives been impacted by the current crisis? How's that worked out with the executive and board level management?
I think it's been extremely strong. I think there's been extremely strong alignment at all times, and that's been critical, and that's crucial in any crisis situation. My observation is the relationship's extremely strong, and it's worked extremely well. That's about the only way I can put it. And the fact that there was a lot of trust also in the teams. So in relation to having crisis teams, we had innovation teams looking at new ways to do business and respond to the challenges and how to work in the new environment that was being faced. So great synergies, and the feedback I've had has been extremely positive. I report to our audit and risk committee 4 times a year, and obviously that frequency is a little bit higher during the early stages. And the relationship and the ability for both to work together, I think it was top rate.
Fantastic. Is either party dominant? The second part of Elmarie's question is does either party take a bigger role in decision making on risk? Is there a dominant party how's the responsibility fall usually?
Well, we're under the UK Corporate Governance Code, so at the end of the day, the operational elements to risk sit firmly with the executive management. So it sits with us to execute, because risk sits at the place where it's going to occur. What we very much report back onto under our code are the principal risks. So we've seen emerging risks to the business that need to be elevated to the board level, and ensuring that the dialogue occurs in that space around the risk. But the execution obviously sits with us in the field. I'm lucky in that, I could theoretically say as the leader of ERM, I don't own any risk. I do actually have some streams that I manage, in, for example, security risk and fraud. But at the end of the day, it's at the point of you need to manage the risk where it's occurring, and that those risks have been observed, and observed by our crisis teams. And I think that's one of the things that I'm extremely proud of having seen, that not only did they follow the crisis processes, but they implemented very effective risk management dialogue on a daily basis. And we're a little bit unique. We changed our risk management program a couple of years ago in that, we had risk registers like everyone does. We have a quarterly routine. We saw things happen very quickly. And by way of example, we're in Belarus, and things are happening. For those who, I don't know how much global news is getting, but Belarus is under interesting times there at present, and things happen so quickly. So a couple of years ago, we decided we needed to reassess the way we do risk in totality. Is having a risk register risk management? No. It's about having the dialogue, the discussion. So we shifted to what we call our Smart Risk program, and we linked it very much to growth mindset training. So if we get the risk right, we're going to grow as a business. But as part of that, we needed to do monthly discussions. So instead of this being a quarterly, let's all get together and talk about risk, we integrated it into the monthly business routines. So the concepts of risk and opportunity were being discussed by leadership teams on a monthly basis. And that enabled us to capture new risks that were coming up potentially very quickly, or might be short-term in nature. That, if you do it in January, you have your next session in March, and something happens in between, did you manage the risk, or was it just good luck? So we changed that methodology. So we really instilled a culture that, we've got to understand the risk. We've got to understand what's happening in our business environment. Are there opportunities we can leverage? And there was a question around that time of, is that going to work? Are our leaders going to accept it? And it's being fully embraced. And what I saw during the response of the crisis teams to COVID was we were actually discussing risk on a daily basis. It had shifted not only from the monthly sort of dialogue, it actually became the focus. What is the risk that now is emerging because of this regulation, because of this issue? How do we protect our people? Health and safety was a big risk. You don't want your plants shut down. How do you engage with the unions and manage their expectations and the expectations of our people? So the teams were understanding the requirements of each of their market and therefore able to respond accordingly. And I thought that was very pleasing because I don't always see it. When you're doing a crisis response, you jump into the next, solving the problem to move on. And sometimes you don't stop to have a look at the risks. But the teams were doing that and they were doing it very effectively.
Brilliant. And now I've got a question from James Kirkbride. My issue is that I have 3 James Kirkbrides across the top of my screen. I think it might be the real James Kirkbride. I wonder if he'd like to ask his own question.
Yeah, I think in many ways, Gerald's dealt with some of that about the genuine communication and the local. But I was interested in many ways at the beginning in terms of in the COVID-19 situation, whether it's had an impact in terms of transforming the organisation's pan-country approach to risk. Because you start off by saying you've got many cultures from Nigeria through to Italy, and you've got local teams who know everything that's happening locally. Well, we even know that local governments don't know what's happening locally. They have that blindness and the consequences and in some cases, very poor management of risk and very poor communication of the risk opportunities. So I wondered if it's delegation gone too far in many ways.
James, I think what I observed, we delegate it, but we do have visibility so that we do actually have a process flow in our risk management, and our crisis response. So what was critical there is that we maintained we have 2 big regions and then we have 3 major markets, Russia, Italy, Nigeria, as our leading markets. And myself, I was very close to the regional directors and their teams on understanding and getting visibility of what we're seeing in respect to trends, in respect to areas where there may be commonalities, where best practice was being utilised. So where the risks were being managed, and it's very much, what Italy was doing was, totally different to what we were seeing, for example, early on in Ireland. Nigeria was totally different. So that's why the risks that were emerging needed to be looked at locally. But we were seeing, we maintained that group visibility at all times, and our requirement in respect to risk in particular was that our business units were updating their risk registers as they saw new risks coming in. And my team has full visibility of those. So my team's job was to do not only coordinate and provide guidance, but to have that external lens on, deal with external partners, look at other things that we were seeing externally that we could bring in to assist us in the management. And that information would then be shared, but we would not force a business unit to actually apply that, because we would say, here's a recommendation because we saw this in respect to lessons learned out of Wuhan or out of what we're seeing in the Coke system we're seeing in Korea. We would provide that recommendation, and then against the backdrop of their local environment and within the framework of the risk program and the crisis response program, to apply that as if they saw that fit. There were certain things that we as a group said we needed to have in place, and that was particularly around people protection and the health and safety. So the standards, very much early on about what do you do if you get a COVID situation in a facility? How do you manage that? How do you deal with government in that situation? And again, we had a couple of cases. However, our relationship and our strategies were such that we had, our downtime was minimal. We were able to work with the government, sanitise, restart. And that was about adapting the strategies that we said at group level needed to be applied, and then letting the local team have that relationship, for example, with local government. because local governments even had a different interpretation of what the national governments might have been saying. We see the inconsistencies across the world in that regard.
Great, thank you. A great question from Monica Watt, one of our attendees. What do you think has been the most valuable data gathered that surprised or impacted your risk management during this period? And did it change the behaviours of the business and its people during COVID, or is it going to influence how you work in the future?
I think the biggest, not so much surprise, but it was a pleasant surprise, was our ability to switch to work from home. As a business, for example, we have a big finance hub in Bulgaria. Being able to switch to work from home, which isn't something that's traditionally done in our business, wasn't traditionally done. We're very much on the Coca work, the human connectivity. That was very pleasing to see that we could execute that very quickly, but it also changed the mindset, because people who may have been sceptical in the business about working from a home environment saw productivity being just as effective, seeing people embrace that because they understood the reason why they had to work from home. And I think that was one of the surprising things. So we took that and we're looking at the ways do we do that in the future. Do we shift? And I don't think we've got the right answer there yet, but we are examining what is the workplace of the future look like for us. Because it was quite interesting. I'm in my office at present. I was in my office the whole time, but the day that's really all kicked off, we just moved to a new building. So we've got this great building, and now we don't have anyone in it except for a handful of us who come in, but we keep a good social distance. But I think that really, as a business, we saw the opportunity there to really examine, how do we work more effectively. I think we're going to end up with a hybrid. That's my own gut feel between working from home and working in the business environment. I got to say, I do miss that ability to engage face to face. I think we're going to transform in the amount of business travel that we do. That's my own feeling, because we've realised, did we really need to do all that travel before to go and have face to face meetings? I used to spend at least almost weekly. I was on a plane somewhere in Europe, and I except for one social flight, I haven't been on a plane since March. And the last time that happened was 1997, that I went that long without being in an airport. So we're going to transform the way I think we do our meetings. We've understood that, yes, work from home can be effective. Yes, you have to do a few things differently. We have to give our people the right tools and the right support in that respect. For example, VPNs with strong bandwidth, so that you've got the security to your networks. But I think, to me, that was the thing that I saw work effectively, that people may have been sceptical of. And indeed, from a crisis perspective, I was sceptical of, as I knew we were moving at speed as well, because that was the challenge, the speed at which the direction you're going to lockdown, you cannot move. Right? And how do you get the resources to your people? How do you ensure that they've got the right backing that enables them to do their job? So I think that's an area we're going to transform.
We'll get on to one of my favourite subjects, which is your research, because I think it's important. We spend a lot of time talking about, the key to all of this is not things and data, is people, and the way people make decisions, how they make decisions, when they make decisions. And you and I have exchanged some interesting stories over the last 7 years about interesting decisions that people make under stress. But just talk a little bit about your research and the idea of leadership and teams, and when people deviate from the script. Just a few points on that.
Okay, thanks, Clive. Just to give the context, when we first came up with the topic for the research, it was because observation that, yes, we have processes and practices in place. A lot of companies have crisis plans, but the issue can arise that when the problem comes up, people forget about the plan, or if they've got the plan, they deviate off the process. And the observation that I'd had is where teams have deviated, their response is either not as good as it should be, or actually creates a bigger issue for the organisation. So the question really was around, is it the ostensive routine, so the plans and the artefacts that are causing the issue, are they not robust enough? Or is it the way that they're interpreted? So that then falls to leadership and team dynamics. And the research really came up with the fact that, everyone, and I interviewed as part of it a lot of subject matter experts globally. And without a doubt, they all said plans and practices and procedures and checklists, they work. It is application and human interpretation that is the challenge. And a number of things fall into place there. One, the capability of the leader. That's one element. The capability and selection of the team. Because one thing that we've observed, and many companies are like that, it's the position you hold, not your experience, that necessarily puts you on the crisis team. So you may be very good. You may be a very, very good commercial leader. Great sales, but when you put on a crisis team under a high-stress situation, that may not be the right place for you to be. And I've seen some people get very stressed by being on crisis teams. So it's team dynamics, the team construct, the leadership. And the other elements that came into play revolve around culture. So different cultures potentially have a different approach towards crisis management. I was based in Asia for a long time. And in some Asian markets, the team will defer to the most senior person in the room. So on a crisis team hour, it's a democracy. Everyone's got a view. There's no one's told what they have to think, and everyone's view is important. You want to encourage that. But in some countries, they look to the most senior person, and if you say, this is what we're going to do, and this is the problem, that's it, and that's not conducive to good response. And the other element was around personalities. Is there a personality type that potentially is more effective at being the crisis leader? Crisis leadership has traditionally been whoever hasn't been able to duck quick enough. Gerald, you're the leader, right? You can do it, or the public affairs communication, or the quality person. So we don't look at the individual and say, do you have the right skill set or the right personality to lead under pressure? So we did a little bit of preliminary work on that, and we're going to continue on that. So the findings are really around, you've got to get your team right, and you've got to get your team right early on. You've got to have the right leader, and the leader's got to have the right balance of adhering to process and understanding the process, but being agile and innovative enough to not sit there and say you must follow every point. Right, so we have some nice charts that we use and tools that say to work out what the problem is, you've got to follow, do this and then follow this guide. And it's a guide. The teams with poor leadership I've seen, they get bogged down because they want to answer every question. So rather than use it as a guide and a thinking methodology, they say you must answer this point before we move to the next. Now, that's great, but that's not going to help us solve the problem with speed and agility. Because for those, and I know many of you may have been on crisis teams, you generally have to make decisions with maybe 60, 70% of the information. You cannot wait to have 100%. You don't have that luxury, particularly if there's a life and death situation in place. All right, so imagine if our product's been contaminated or something, and there's a risk that people may get seriously ill. Right, you need to be able to respond, and you may not have all the information. So that's the elements that you need to get right, in my view, and that's where the research came out. And it was interesting because we did it both with manual coding and we did automated coding, and we came up with the same answers around where the reasons for deviation were. So to get it right, another fundamental is once you've got the right construct, train, 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 and train. You train people enough, it becomes...
Need to train.
Yeah. So you embed the concepts, and you find that teams will potentially they'll follow the process, but it becomes more intuitive. They know mentally what the questions are they have to ask themselves. I still, after my even many years of doing this, I still keep the checklists in front of me because I know that when you are under pressure, you'll get focused on something and you'll miss something. So just having that luxury to go back and just analyse, did I follow the process correctly? Did I miss something? I find is quite valuable.
Now, you've got another bit of interesting research going on at the moment that I know you're pretty enthusiastic about. Tell us a little bit about, I think it's just an excuse for you to go and play computer games personally, but tell us a bit about your work with the university.
Yeah, I'm doing some work with Abertay University in Dundee in Scotland. Going back historically, I was at a conference and they presented, it was an Interpol conference actually, and they developed a game to train investigators on investigative techniques. And Abertay is one of the leading UK universities in the digital space, ethical hacking, computer gaming, that's their focus area. And so we thought, well, this sounds a great concept. So I got talking to them and we had a meeting. We said, well, how about we have a look? Could we develop a computer game that we could use, taking our crisis methodology and our way of simulating and use that as an additional training mechanism. So we did a year with their third year undergrads, going back in 2018 into 2019. And they had to develop a game. So we taught them our crisis program. We gave them our materials and they developed a game concept. And the game was that good, it won the gold medal in the Serious Game Awards internationally in the student category. Because not only did they follow the methodology and come up with a game, they added something that we didn't even ask for, and that was the ability to change the scenario. So we have a scenario editor. So when I've got people who play it when it's eventually rolled out and they think, I've beaten the computer, well, Gerald can go in and we can put in a new scenario and they get to do something different. And behind it, there's a whole scoring mechanic. We also put in levels of, I don't know, I'm not a big computer gamer, but you've got your beginner level, your intermediate and your experienced. Our crisis leaders, for example, if you're a crisis leader and you've been doing it, you're not allowed to play the lower ones, you've got to play experienced. And what it does, the higher the level, the quicker you have to make your decisions. And you get penalised if you're slow. So the scoring mechanic behind it based on time, based on the correct decisions. And out of that, we then understand, how strong potentially a leader is. And there's things like, to make it more stressful, your heart, you start hearing your heartbeat through the screen, the music picks up, phones start ringing in the room, the news on the video will pick up. So it's quite innovative. We're actually in the final stages of development. So we took the package the students did. We did some work with interns last year in the summer, and now it's in its final development stage, and we're hoping to roll out a web-based game in Q4 of this year, which will then link into our overall training program. So we're going to have a regime where we're developing a really snazzy online training tool with videos and everything in it. People will do the online training, they play the game, and then we supplement that with the simulations. That's sort of our thinking of how we take this to the next level. And the one thing we're looking at as part of the research, so we're in the final testing stage. We have a great big pool of testers. We're also getting them to put in their personality type. Now, we're utilising Myers-Briggs, and I'm not going into the debate around whether that's a good one. It's just readily accessible, and from a business perspective, a lot of business people have done it. We actually now use insights, and there is a correlation. But as an initial scenario, we just want to get that. We're going to get the scores, we're going to get the feedback about how good the game is and what needs to be improved. But what it will enable us to see is someone quite strong? And then just as a quick snapshot, was there a personality type that was stronger? And then we're going to look in how we can potentially use insights and other personality tools to deep dive into that. I think it's pretty exciting, it's pretty innovative. Abertay's been really supportive, and great bunch of academics over there that I'm working with.
Yeah, I can see this got massive applications given some of the big issues we've got going on worldwide, particularly with crises. I'm thinking in the Australian context, which is where you're from and I live at the moment. I think there's huge opportunity to perhaps look at how we train crisis commanders. I did a bit of work a few years ago on crisis management, on emergency situations. And the more we can do to prepare and simulate, the better. And this sounds like a brilliant initiative. Just before we finish up, a final little, it's a bit of a loaded question, I suppose you could say, from one of the three James, one of the three wise James Kirkbrides, the real James Kirkbride. And that is, do you think that, has it changed your views on the sort of skill set that leaders need to develop, demonstrate? Is there things that we need to be thinking about that'll take us past some of the more conventional education that we do for leadership?
Yeah, I think the big one is, it's come to the fore in recent last year or so, and I know there's a lot of it. There's two. It's about agility.
Yeah.
You need to be fast on your feet, and you don't want to. And while we talk about process deviation, you can have process but still be agile, and I think that's the important lesson that we need to teach our leaders. The speed of change, the speed at which you need to respond. Yes, you follow the process. The process is there as a guide, and I stress that. It's not there as a checkbox. It's not there that you have to follow every element. It's to guide you so you make correct decision-making. But the speed in which those decisions need to be made by the leader of the crisis team, or the leader actually anywhere in the business, and their team, the time span is shortening. And we've seen that recently. So I think agility is one. And the other big change, and it's a bit of a buzzword as well at present, is growth mindset. We need to start thinking that what we're doing is going to contribute to the growth of your organisation and your enterprise. Growth in revenue, growth in the way that you're also seen by your stakeholders in a positive way. So it's the way that you engage and collaborate with external stakeholders. And I'm not talking shareholders, I'm talking about every interested party out there. So agility, growth mindset. And I think the last one is that everybody needs to understand risk management in the organisation. I still see, I look more broadly across organisations, and risk still has the problem of sometimes just sitting in a little box off to the side, and people perceive that as the sphere of specialists. We have a mantra here: we're all risk managers. We have that saying in every language that's used in the company, and we promote that. We all have a role to play. We all need to be agile about it. We all need to look at growth opportunities and not fall into that risk is bad. We can leverage opportunities and grow. So agility, growth mindset, and everyone needs to understand risk management. And we've just developed a new online training tool that I'm encouraging all our senior leaders, at least our top 300, to undertake by the end of the year, so that we're all talking the same language, understand why are we doing this and what are the benefits to the enterprise.
That's brilliant. That's a really good note to finish up with. Thanks for that. Very enjoyable. Some good, clear thinking there. And I'll just wrap up now and thank everybody for coming along. Just a very, very brisk, as one does. Transforming Leaders contributes to a product that we have, a service that we're giving, that we're handing on to students all over the world, really, or at least this side of the UK. A 12-month mentoring program that leads to 2 awards: the CMI Chartered Certified Transformational Leader, and also York St John's University MBA in Transformational Leadership Strategy. And that's a 12-month program that's 100% online. It's recognised worldwide. I just thought I should mention that. And next month, we've had a great presentation. We're in for a lively presentation next month with these 2 colleagues of mine from one of my other tribes called Thought Leaders. Dr. Amy Silver, a very highly qualified clinical psychologist who does a lot of work around wellness in the workplace and has been very successful across Australia and worldwide in that space. And one of my favourite people, Alessandra Edwards, who's a peak performance expert. She takes a look at your genetic makeup to see what it is you're doing wrong. In my case, that was everything. So she's finally got me rebalanced and sorted out. So but these are two highly capable, highly trained experts in their field. They're going to talk about bracing for impact and how we have to look after ourselves psychologically and physiologically, surviving and thriving in the pandemic era. They've got a great book out as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing those two next month. And we'll be on a meeting rather than on a webinar. So those of you who joined us as attendees, we'll be able to see you next time, which will be a greater benefit. Just in closing, Gerald, thank you so much for your time. I know you're incredibly busy. The others of you wouldn't know, Gerald's about to move to a new role in Coca-Cola, and he's going to be looking after Japan from Amsterdam, which is going to be an interesting exercise. You'd agree, Gerald? So, and all of that.
Yeah, time zone wise, it's going to be interesting, but let's hope our little virus friend goes away and we can I can eventually move there. Yeah, it's been a great and exciting 7 years almost with CCHBC, but a new challenge awaits in the Coke system. Another adventure.
Look, thank you so much for your time. I know you're incredibly busy, and thank you everybody, all of the attendees, for joining us.